All right, we're gonna let people filter on in. Michael, what were you doing before Novo? I'm not sure I actually know.
I was working at a large money manager that just relocated down from the Northeast to Miami.
And why did you how'd you go from that to starting a company? This is the first time you started a company, right?
Correct. That is a much longer story, which we won't be able to share it during this webinar, but I'm happy to share it with you at some time.
Yeah.
Moral of the story is that working there, we were very much a small business by employee count. And we were only about 20 people at that operation. We were managing, upwards of $20 million, but I had my hand in a lot of places, right? So reconciling my trades one day, it was just kind of that aha moment where, I fully understand and know Excel like the back of my hand, but it sent me down the proverbial rabbit hole of just what about everybody else?
Mm-hmm.
Right? No one else, and I shouldn't say no one else. Most people don't have the same type of skills as myself or anyone with a finance or accounting background. So that's the biggest proverbial rabbit hole that I've ever gone down in my life. And, you find out all these metrics about, poor cash management, leading cause to small business failure, and, so on and so forth. And that's what got us really excited about the problem, because we believe that it has never really been addressed, or at least the root problem. Right? The root problem being there's all of this cash management that could quite literally just be intertwined in the underlying checking account, which makes the most sense of the checking account is the hub for any business anyways. Why isn't it there?
Yeah.
So
awesome. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. We're gonna get started in a second here. I'm joined with Michael. Give us a shout out. Where are people based? I always like to see where everyone's dialing in from. Usually we get at least 2 or 3 continents on here. So give us a shout out where you're at, and we'll get started here in a second. And let me, you can see my slides, yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, we got Texas, we got California, we got the Valley, we got the Netherlands. There we go. Awesome. Belgium, New Brunswick. Very cool. We got people all over the world. All right, I'm gonna hit next here. Everyone meet, we got Michael and Mike. So I'm gonna try to keep it to simple. I'm gonna be Mike. I'm the founder of Visible. Michael is the CEO of Novo. And today we're talking about Novo's recent Series A round, over $40 million raised. I've been fortunate enough to know Michael now for a couple of years, been a long time Visible customer using us for investor updates. We saw the race and the story behind it. And then I believe, Michael, you put some of these slides online, right? And kind of open source them to give people a little bit of a peek.
Yep.
Very cool. A couple more shout outs. We got Brazil, Boston, London, Montreal. Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining. Today, just some things we'll cover. We're going to, what does it look like to be ready for a Series A? What needs to be in place for that, how to prepare yourself personally, how to prepare your company, how to prepare your pitch, and what kind of documents look like, what do you need to have together for a Series A, and then the story, right, and the narrative behind all of this. We'll leave plenty of time for Q&A, so please leave questions in the Q&A. We'll get to them either real time if it makes sense, or circle back to them at the end. But really all things kind of picking Michael's brain. He's been generous enough to share his time with us today. And some questions we always get, so feel free not to ask these, but we always record and send this out after. So if you got to jump or want to come back to something, we record this. We'll send out the recording to everyone that's registered. We'll do a write-up. So yes, we are recording it. Feel free, again, to drop any questions in the Zoom chat or email Matt. We're going to monitor that real time. And we'll just jump right in. And so one of the things that we started to look at, Michael, is this idea of kind of 3 things. Right? We talked to a lot of investors about pre-seed, seed, and a lot of times it's story, and team is probably the most important part of that story, and then market sizing. I think maybe come Series A, it's those things plus the engine. Like, do you have repeatable acquisition? Do you have sustainability with how you're acquiring customers? What do your metrics look like in terms of growth, low churn, efficiency? And then the story, like, again, the story matters from inception, but what does the story look like now? How has that story changed? How are you tracked to your original story? So I'd just be curious to hear from you when you guys thought you were ready for your A. Were any of these things sticking out? Was it like the engines, the metric, the story, all three? Would love just kind of hear your thoughts on these three bullets.
Yeah, totally. So the first thing, though, that is missing here kind of is revenue, right? Like Series A is when revenue is brought into focus a bit more, because that is also, it's also correlated with product market fit, obviously. But revenue is where it starts, becoming more of a significant part to the pitch to show, hey, this is a viable business. So that, goalpost is typically, during normal times, it's between $1 to $2 million ARR or a forward-looking annualized revenue run rate. So that was kind of our first checkpoint where we had I think end of last year, so end of December, we netted about $1.7 million annualized revenue run rate. So we knew that with those metrics we'd be pretty well suited to kick off that Series A process.
That's awesome. And how do you guys make money? Because you mentioned run rate, right? So it's like you're not a recurring revenue business. You're not charging people a recurring fee. So what does that look like for you guys?
Without diving too deep into the weeds here, it's interchange, right? So interchange, although it's not recurring revenue, I'm sure a lot of people on the call have heard of other challenger banks like Chime, right? There's a lot of forecastability inherent to the way interchange income works, right? On a monthly basis, right? We're able to forecast out that about 30-ish% of total incoming credits to an account will be put on a debit card, right? And so then you're able then to forecast that out over time with growth, with maturity of the cohorts, et cetera, kind of where you'll end up.
Got it. Okay.
That's all
awesome.
Interchanging.
Yeah. And it sounds like maybe initially, if I recall, you guys paused because this was kind of when COVID first started. How did that change the approach at all, or the story, or did it help or did it hurt? Because I think if I recall, you guys had to pause efforts originally.
Yeah, it definitely didn't help. I'll tell you that much. I definitely lost years of my life as a result of that period last year. We literally just went out to start our fundraising process. It's like early to mid of February of 2020, right? It was literally like, I think it was something like a week before like the SF lockdown happened. So all the VCs are slowly, starting to get, a little bit more locked up, no in-person meetings, all of that stuff. But we were still going, pounding the pavement door to door. Then that quickly got reinforced by all of the lockdowns, and we were in our house, right? All kind of like in our own respective silos. Fundraising became incredibly difficult, right? There was a few month period last year where VCs definitely preferred triaging their existing portfolio versus, catering to new deals. And so that was a big shock to the system for us. What ended up happening is we paused. Our insiders, saw kind of where the metrics were heading, the activity that we were able to drum up, et cetera, came together with an inside round in order to bridge us to, the other side.
The other side looks pretty good, at least today, right? Like the market's pretty wild. So kudos to them and to you for putting that together. But let's talk about preparation. I think that's so key for any fundraise and especially in A. There's kind of preparing yourself, your company, the pitch and the process. I think Y Combinator has some interesting data. And we'll just kind of get your take on each of these. We'll go down the list. So average Series A fundraise takes 4 to 6 months. How long did it take you guys? I know you had a pause, so that kind of changes things. But from when you restarted the effort, how long did it take from your kind of initial getting docs together, the pitch that we're going to go through shortly, and closing it. Do you recall how long it took you guys to execute the whole thing?
Yeah, so I guess we officially started fundraising beginning of February this year.
Okay.
Right, and then getting docs together, presentation, yada yada. We ended up like actually closing and making the announcement. Well, no, closing is different than announcement. Closing, I think, was in June.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken, like late May or early June.
Okay.
And then we made the announcement, 45 or 15 business days after that.
Yeah. So kind of the earlier time phrase, but 4 months.
Yeah.
And how did you prepare yourself? I think from so many founders, they talk about fundraising, taking themselves out of the business, and being distracted and not being able to give your time to the business. How did you do that with Novo? Did you have a leadership team in place that, hey, I want to be pounding the pavement and doing this thing for the next 4 months? How did you balance the company building versus the fundraise process for yourself?
Yeah, listen, it's always easier said than done, right? I'm sure everyone on the call has heard, right? Fundraising is a full-time job, and it definitely 100% is. That said, you're never going to be able just to do fundraising either, right? Like you will be kind of like pulled back, whether there are problems, whether there are issues that need your attention, different updates across the business. Like you will always kind of be pulled back, and you're going to need to do it. Hopefully you're able to insulate yourself enough to focus more on the fundraising front, right? Because as you continue to pound the pavement, like that requires a lot of time. The way that I've done that is by having kind of, your management team, briefing them, hey guys, over the next X time period, like I'm going to be spending way more over there. So, we're not going to have as frequent of one-on-ones, right? We're not going to go as deep in, certain reporting metrics, et cetera. While then kicking some of the other responsibilities to some of the other leaders in the organization. And this is also a time to really lean on your co-founder, right? Like this is why you have a co-founder. I joke with my co-founder, he was only brought to like the third or fourth meetings, if at all. And it's also no surprise why he came to me after the fact. He's like, man, this fundraising stuff is pretty easy. I'm like, shut up. Like, you don't. But like lean on your co-founders, right? Like they know that you're pounding the pavement and that a lot of the stress and load is on you. So I would definitely do that.
Yeah. Anything you learned going through the AA, like other things maybe to do or not to do as it relates to like putting yourself in or out of the business that would be helpful for, pre-seed to seed founder to know right now?
To do or not to do. So that's kind of what I already said, right? Like you can say, hey, I'm totally out of the business, right? But I also think that's kind of selfish and a bit ignorant. Like you're in my case, like you're the CEO, right? And so at the end of the day, like all the responsibility is going to fall on you anyways. So by you saying, hey, I'm not going to talk to you, even their problems awry, like definitely not the way to do it. Like you will have to strike that balance. When it comes to running the process itself, one thing that I would say to do is get an ally, get someone on your side of the battlefield internally. Hopefully, usually it's one person to help share the load, right? Whether that's pulling together, data requests, materials, follow-up Q&A, helping you with the data room materials, emails, et cetera. Like it is incredibly onerous to do this yourself, especially if you're the ones communicating and doing the digging. So I definitely say, to caution against burnout, get someone to help you.
Who was that person for you? Was it like a VP of finance or was chief of staff?
Yeah, it was my head of finance.
Okay, awesome. And did all of your, it sounds like your direct reports knew, did the entire company, at the time know you were out raising around? You're pretty transparent about it?
Yeah.
Awesome. And what did it look like when you were away? Were you still kind of doing the all hands in typical cadence, keeping the enthusiasm high, or were you keeping people in the loop? You're 2 months in, what's the status of the fundraise? Like what did your cadence look like in terms of the transparency from
Mhm.
how well the raise is or isn't going down to, people that are not direct reports.
Totally. Good question. So the way that I view it is like you as the CEO, you definitely have to insulate the rest of the organization from the muck that you might be dealing with. You definitely should be transparent about what's going on, right? The difficulties, challenges, concerns, etc. But you also don't want to air kind of any potential dirty laundry or market sentiment either, because that might also act as like the other side of the blade, right? Like it might scare people. As a CEO, you have to have like the thickest skin in the room, and you can't be swayed by a lot of external kind of variables or opinions, whereas a lot of other people might not have that same toughness, right? So
Sure.
you tell your engineering team, hey guys, no one's investing because apparently our tech sucks. Like that's not going to be the most motivating thing to share with your team, right?
Yeah.
But so like there, you have to kind of like translate all of that in order to, give kind of whatever the most constructive items might be back to the team. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you set expectation for timing too? Like, hey, this is not an overnight thing. This is like going to be a months-long process.
Yeah. Typically, I mean, I shared, I know you have 4 to 6 here. I think I shared with the team internally like 3 to 6.
Yeah. And what did you set? Let's talk about process a little bit. We talked about some of the metrics around revenue, and we'll get to like I said, the deck here next. But in terms of maybe talk about like materials or things you that were helpful you pulled together maybe ahead of time as collateral for jumping things off. If I recall, even in the seed round, you guys had a pretty cool even like wiki page you put together to supplement the raise. Like, what kind of collateral are you putting together that might have been different than the seed round?
Yeah, so that is an interesting question, and I think it's interesting that you remember that. Because there's like a tricky balance, right? Like raising venture is a very, very, very interesting beast, because there isn't one formula as to the best way to do it necessarily. Because you're also balancing personalities, you're balancing emotions, you're balancing literally an exponential number of variables that a founder CEO will never be able to kind of stomach. That said, like it was difficult for me to kind of balance the fact like, if I prepare a lot of stuff and I share that stuff, will that help me in pitching? Right? That was what I thought would make the most sense. Until I got the perspective of other investors where they're like, actually, this makes you look pretty desperate. Right? Think about that. It's like, as a founder, you're like, I want to be super prepared. I want to come to the table. Here's all my stuff. Here's a data room. Here's this beautiful presentation. But like, some people might take that as an act of desperation. You're like, holy crap. Like I had no idea. I thought that was me just being, doing a good job. So there is this tricky balance of the amount of information you share and when you share it, right? What I think is probably the most, and what I did this last round was, we had the full deck, right? The full kind of investor deck, 15 slides, I think it was, plus an appendix. We then crunched that down to a teaser deck. That teaser deck was like 5-ish slides, right? Literally, it's just like the catnip, right? It's the catnip to get people interested, people who you've never spoken to. Hey, do you want to talk or not? Right? And you just send them the teaser deck. Nothing proprietary, like nothing, no goal, no kind of like big things that are difficult to understand or comprehend, but more like give the quick pitch. Effectively, it's almost like the elevator pitch, just in a visual form. And so you do that. If they bite, then you have that follow-up meeting where you run them through the full deck. I didn't share our full deck with anyone until after that meeting, and only if they even asked for the deck. If they didn't ask for the deck, right, as a CEO, you need to be literally internalizing every little clue. If they didn't ask for the deck, like chances are they're probably not interested. Right? Versus forcing a square peg through a round hole of like, hey, here's my deck. Hey, Mike, you want access to my data ring? Like I did that all the first time around and just wasted a lot of time and energy. right? You just want to kind of filter it down with the people that are most interested and get them the materials that they're looking for instead of catering to the entire universe of investors.
Got it. So putting that back, you got the full deck. You took that full deck, 15 slides plus appendix. You put that into a teaser deck, and the teaser deck is what you're sending out as kind of the initial catnip, get someone interested. Then they're like, hey, Michael, love to talk to you. You walk them then real time through the full deck. And then at the end of that, you use a signal of, if they ask for it, send it. That means they're probably engaged. And if not, that's another signal, probably not engaged.
Yeah, exactly. And so the other thing about the teaser deck too, though, which is actually pretty valuable, and then we can move on, is this is the vehicle that you are extending through forwardable introductions, right? So you're putting together your quick little blurb, right? And you share that with whoever, your network, your existing investors, people who are connected to VCs more broadly. Hey, here's a blurb and here's my teaser deck, forward this to whoever you want or think might be relevant, right? So it's a little bit more than the blurb.
Yep. And you're not putting, you said nothing proprietary. So you're not putting any, even though Series A, we mentioned like revenue kind of was one of the hurdles to clear, you weren't putting anything kind of traction wise in that teaser deck.
No, you can. I mean, it depends on the business here, right?
Yeah.
It 100% depends on the business, because I don't think, top line growth metrics are necessarily proprietary, right? Like you can tell anyone that and they're not going to do anything. But traction is usually a way to garner someone's attention pretty quickly. So like earlier in the year, like our growth chart literally looked off the charts. I mean, we'll see it in a bit.
Yeah.
Like people looked at that and they're like, holy crap. Like, yeah, we definitely want to talk to you. What do you do? Like, it was pretty funny.
Yeah. All right, let's get into it. So I'm going to have to be a little bit of your Vanna White here, because this is the first time we've done this, which would be pretty cool. So anyone, please feel free to ask questions. We're going to go through it. And was this the teaser deck we're looking through? Because I know it's
no, this is the fuller deck. This is these 3 slides are the fuller deck, just to set the stage for the broader narrative. But so once again, though, like I wouldn't send this to someone who I've never met before, right? So the people who I'm sending this have a bit more context about who we are, where we play, differentiation, etc. And then this is just how I would start off the pitch. So we have these first 3 slides to kind of paint that broader picture of, hey, here's the massive, massive, massive problem that everyone knows. The only way you're able to do that, right, is by doing this other thing that no one does. And we've already done it.
Yeah, awesome. All right, let's start. So I'll hand it over to you here, but we're gonna kind of walk through these slides. And again, feel free to drop any questions that you guys have in, but I'll go and then you tell me when to advance. But this is kind of first slide.
Yep.
Cool. Awesome. Talk us through this slide.
Got it. So this is just to build off the last one, right? So it's, hey, the number 1 problem for all small businesses is cash flow, right? The follow-up is the only way you can change anything in banking is by controlling the infrastructure. And so in the first one, I didn't even know I was giving a pitch. So
sorry.
So no, it's all good. So it's cash flow, but you can only really address cash flow by going at the root of the problem and building tech. And as everyone on this call can see, like banks don't really have an interest in doing that, right? Like they have a focus on high revenue generating products. They don't really care about the tech, especially when thinking through the SMB side of the house. And so when we kind of reflected on that, and it was like, cool, well, in order for us to solve that number 1 problem, we're going to have to build a lot more tech in order to actually build and create and innovate in different ways in order to address that, right? So it's not just the checking account that everyone has, but it's like all of that infrastructure, that full stack that we've built is going to enable us to do all this stuff that no one else can do, right? And I don't want to get into the weeds of like why that's different or not.
Yeah.
But that's effectively what these first 2 slides encapsulate, and then you can go on the next one, which is effectively, our secret. If you want to go to the next slide, Mike.
Yeah.
No, I think you skipped one slide.
Oh, hold on. Sorry. I
There
got
you
this
go.
one.
Yeah,
Yep.
right. It's like our secret is that we've already done that. So we've already taken the time, money, resources, and building out that entire stack ourselves, right? We've leveraged it into the perfect wedge in order to solve that number one problem that I just referenced 2 slides before for an underserved market, right? So this is kind of like meshing a few different strategic points together all in one slide, which definitely puts kind of like philosophically where we're focused, how we're also alluding to the fact that, hey, this is just where we're starting. This is just the first layer of the layer cake, right? Like everything that we do from now builds on top of that, and the business continues to get more and more exciting. And so we've also kind of carved out, the underserved market of small business owners, small online businesses. And then boom, next slide is like the growth curve. Right. And it's like, hey, guess what? This is over back in March. So at the time, over 65,000 small businesses are voting with their wallets, right? So, getting app store reviews, getting, views or impressions, all of this stuff. We thought that this was the best way to articulate our traction to date was like, hey, we not only have 65,000 opened accounts, but on the left side here, this graph is total deposits.
Right.
So the total dollars across the entire Novo account portfolio, we whited out that y-axis there. What we crossed back in March was about $220 million across the entire portfolio. And so to flip it another way, at the end of 2020, we were at slightly above 20,000 accounts with about $60 million in deposits, right? Yeah. So you can see the exaggeration of that growth curve and kind of how that translates.
Yeah.
And so this is that graph of like, that just catches everyone's attention, right? Everyone's like, whoa, like I need to dial in. I got to focus here because like whatever this is, it's interesting, right? And so that was kind of what we were intending to get done here. So when we always, flip to this slide in front of investors, I always got some pretty hilarious reactions. I got, oh my God, what is that? They said, is that GameStop stock, that Tesla, or is that Bitcoin? Yeah. But like all of those things, crazy growth curves. And so we were just able to kind of walk them through what had happened and how that then is reflected on the right side when thinking about growth over the last, 12 plus months. Well, but this is the capture slide.
I'm probably going to ask the same question that every investor now asks, right? Because now you got me hooked. It's like, what happened in that like February to March timeframe? And did you do that tactically knowing you're going to go raise at that, at that time frame too, or did this happen irrelevant of the raise?
So this happened, and this is just kind of one of those things that you can't even make up. Like one of the reasons why this curve is so exaggerated is because one of our largest, or the largest direct competitor that we had in the space was another company called Azlo, AZLO. Azlo was effectively a sub-brand that operated under BBVA US.
Okay.
Excuse me. BBVA US was acquired last year by another bank, by PNC. And I think like Q3-ish timeline. At the beginning of the year is January 7th of this year, where PNC made the announcement that they were just shutting down Azlo. So our biggest, most formidable competitor in the space, from one day to the next, was just being turned off. And there was no like transition, account migration. It was just like, hey, 100,000 plus small businesses, you got to find somewhere else to do business. Effectively, what happened is like in a boardroom somewhere, they just realized that migration cost would have been too expensive. And so they just said, just shed it off the balance sheet.
Oh my God. How did you guys capture that? Were you targeting those customers? Like how did you capture, did you do anything tactically to capture that?
Yeah, so a few ways. Well, first off, let me rewind a bit. So Azlo before was literally our biggest, most direct competitor. Like the Venn diagram between Novo and Azlo is like very much overlapping. A lot of our affiliate sites will say, hey, Novo's great, they're just like Aslo, or hey, Aslo is great, they're just like Novo. We competed for the same type of customers in the same places, except Aslo is spending 10x more than we were, right? So maybe in a normal day, we would acquire 10% of that pie, right? And Aslo is taking the lion's share. But everything from like the product standpoint, the fee structure, et cetera, it was very, synonymous with the way that Aslo built their business. And so already by default going into it, right, everyone already compared Novo and Aslo together on that same level, right? And so when January 7th happened, it was absolutely crazy. We actually knew about it a few days before then because we were talking with the Aslo exec team about some of the stuff that was going on. It ended up leaking that day, and people started taking to social media being like, what the hell? What do you mean my bank is going away? Like it was absolutely crazy. But what we did was we did a few things. One, we spun up like certain tactics specifically focused on what we call Aslo converts. People literally migrating from Aslo to Novo. We then built, some product functionality as well to become more in parity with the Aslo offering. We actually spoke with the exec team over at Aslo about, how do we make the best home for the customers? They told us, you have to build invoicing, number one, and another concept called, I think they called them envelopes. We call them reserves, right? It's effectively like a budgeting tool. We literally spun those up over a weekend. Like over a single weekend, we worked all through the weekend, our team here and our team in India, and we deployed them on Monday. To just, kind of go above and beyond saying, hey, we are offering the best home for all the Aslo companies. Anyways, during that period, like even during that graph, only about 30% of our top line growth was attributable to Aslo, right? So that's the other big piece here. So that means, 70% of growth was normal Novo growth, right? Because remember, we were at one point, it was 10% going to Novo, 90% going to Aslo. And then all of a sudden, like it was 100% coming to Novo. So that was a big piece, but we did that. We also spun up kind of an Aslo specific referral program as well for people to refer other Aslo customers. We worked with the team over at Aslo to kind of send out emails and such. We did a few different things, but it worked in the end.
Love it. There's like two great startup stories in there. One is like just, not dying, right? And just grit. And then the other one is like speed, like being able to deliver a couple of the features that you mentioned for the transition. So that's awesome. So you got this incredible traction slide. What do you follow up with next in terms of like, how do you follow up? And maybe before we go to the next slide, is this you pitching, or like if certain questions are coming like we just did there, are you jumping around the deck to different appendices, or are you kind of just speaking to the slide and you keep the same cadence when you're delivering this?
Yeah, great point. And that's definitely something, everyone has a different style, right?
Yeah.
Mine is probably weird, but I feel that everyone's is probably a little weird. So I typically stick to certain anchor points that you want to get across, but then you're able to kind of deviate from it, right? Like people will pull you like a few slides into the future, or, they'll ask you a question that you had in the appendix and it's like, hey, do you mind if I, run over there, show you that, and then we'll come back here. Definitely you want to be flexible, right? Like if it's just a monologue, like that's not a good sign. Reading the room, like monologues are never good signs. Most of the times, they're either not paying attention to you, they're checking out their phone, what have you. You want to make sure they're engaged, and usually a measure of that is them kind of interacting, asking thoughtful questions, et cetera.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so we're gonna go to the next slide here, which is
I think one thing I want to add though quickly, Mike, is like after that slide, one thing that you'll probably never guess is that, I think we're going to get to this probably in a little bit, but after this slide, it was a double-edged sword. We had crazy growth. That growth, however, was also very difficult for investors to quantify. It's like our fundraising process was very hard, way harder than I ever would have anticipated. Just because they were like, hey, you had this one thing as this massive, crazy, once in a lifetime thing where you have all this crazy growth. Like, how do you forecast that? Right. And because it was like squarely outside of the VC's kind of mental model, it was very difficult for a lot of people to kind of craft a story around that. Right. It's like, well, what happens when Aslo is done? Right. Are you just going to, grow 1/10 of what you were growing, or are you going to stop growing? What are you doing with product? Like, anyways, that's a rabbit hole of great. Yeah. But we can.
Did you guys workshop that? Like, how did you come up with the proper response? Because I'm sure that question is going to come up every single time with an investor.
Yeah, you know what though? It's like the right investor got it. The right investor, not only did they get it, but they also saw the tactics in which we implemented, because we were also incredibly aggressive. And we said, cool, let's ride this wave. We're going to jam the pedal to the gas pedal here. Yeah. Like, this is a one-time thing where it's like we can almost fast forward a full year of acquisition and compress it down to a couple months. And we're going to see ROI from this for years to come.
Yeah.
Right. So like, that's kind of what we did. And we knew the right investor would see that, because obviously, I mean, with where we're at currently with our KPIs, like, they're through the roof. Yeah. And one of those ingredients is because we had positioned ourselves so well earlier in the year.
Awesome. So your next slide then is the competitive landscape.
Yeah, so this is an interesting slide that I always spent a ton of time on. This is also, so I'm not going to recommend that everyone does something like this. I specifically did this because the challenger banking industry is pretty bonkers, and it is very, very, very saturated. And a lot of investors, I shouldn't say a lot, but different investors get scared with different dynamics, right? So one of the dynamics is, if you look on the right side of that slide, you have the likes of Brex, Mercury, Bluevine, Divvy. At the time, like, these companies had raised tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. But that's all that they have in their mind. And so, like, whenever I got the question of like, how are you guys going to stack up against Brex? It's always like, well, actually, like, Brex isn't really that relevant of a company to Novo at all.
Sure.
They're like, well, what do you mean? And we're like, well, first of all, like, they have a completely different product. Yes, they are on the kind of periphery and tangentially related, but like, where they fit in the market, like, we don't even compete for customers at all, right? Like, we are that mainstream online small business segment, which don't interest Brex at all, at least before, right? It was like, if you don't have $250,000 in your checking account, like, Brex didn't want to talk to you, right? But a lot of investors didn't have that context, and so they get intimidated by the dollars being thrown. And so on either side of the Novo bar here, right, there's a lot of VC capital injected. And so this was a way for us to just kind of frame the entire market, take a step back. Hey, this is where we play. This is why we play here, because it's the largest segment, and it's the largest untapped segment too, right? So these logos under the Novo logo were all grayed out. So it's like, hey, listen, these guys are all dealing with some inefficiencies or some problems. We're literally the only ones picking up the pieces right now, as can be seen from the growth, chart beforehand.
I love this, because you actually do market sizing and the competitive landscape like in the same slide.
Yeah.
Which is pretty smart. All right, so moving on to the next slide then. I'll let you take it over here, but it's kind of customer referrals, customer stories. A little bit.
So this isn't customer referrals or stories. This is more just personified.
Oh, persona. Yep.
Right. So like, it's once again reinforcing, hey, small business banking is broken, right? But don't take our word for it. Take theirs, because this is another thing that everyone on this call should definitely think of, is that you always have to make sure that the investor feels the problem. And guess what? For us specifically, a small business as a customer, VCs are very far removed from that problem statement, right? They are very far up market, so they fit more in the mix with like the Brexes of the world, and they understand why the Brex would have this massive opportunity ahead of them. But when it comes to small businesses, it's like, like it's not that exciting because they aren't able to relate to it. But so here, what we did is we just looked at Twitter and got some of the, most flagrant tweets out there from just random people, and put them here to personify that problem of, hey, business banking is very much broken. Like there are thousands of these tweets. And then this is what you kind of distill it down to make it more digestible for the investors too, right? Distilling it down to those three things: overwhelming fees and tech, siloed data, and the slow moving financial system, money just moving really slow. And what this is doing is it's teeing it up for what happens next, right? So, hey, enter Novo, introduce Novo. We solve those things by X, Y, and Z, right? So we focus on creating, that easy to use business banking product, right? Which then, to tie that back to the first slide as well, that proprietary infrastructure unlocks, meaning, hey, these other guys in the arena can't do this. We have an advantage over them. So you're just kind of like reinforcing that. Streamlining data, right? Connecting all of these kind of like disparate sources right into the checking account and moving cash faster, right? Speeding up those payments. And we're only able to do all of that by the infrastructure we built.
Awesome. Great. And this is kind of another solution slide.
Yeah, and we just kind of piece that out by those three ways, starting with the fast onboarding, right? And the card products, deep integrations, which it ties to the streamlining of data right across all the different tools, and the app store being the way that kind of bundles everything together.
Awesome.
So this is a pretty hairy slide, which we're not going to spend too much time on, but this is us just effectively comping us versus the competition, right? Kind of like giving that visualization of what that quote unquote infrastructure that I've been referring to the entire time, giving a visualization of what that looks like. So if you look on the right side, right, it's Novo banking versus what we articulate on the left side, business banking 101. If you see, under where you have the Novo logo on the right, that is our own proprietary infrastructure. But if you compare that to the left, you have some of these fintechs that are just plugged into someone else's platform, right? They're leveraging someone else's pipes who sit on top of that bank. Whereas at Novo, we've effectively internalized that layer to just power ourselves. That's effectively the takeaway here.
Yeah, that's like that's like your moat, right? Is like this whole infrastructure.
One of them. Yeah, exactly. And then this, once again, kind of shows or reinforces that traction too. Hey, we're growing like crazy. You saw our growth charts, et cetera, but we're also growing sustainably, right? Our customers love our product. At this time, we had the highest ratings of any of our competitors, both on iOS and Google on the Play Store. And we showed some of those App Store reviews while giving a little bit of the street cred we've garnered, via different awards and recognition that we got from the press. This is always just a good slide. I think we might have even had this in the appendix just to show those interested parties. Because one of the other things, right, is like this market is incredibly saturated. So show us your customers love us, right?
Yeah. I think this is it's kind of just the final thank you slide. Awesome. Let's take a look. I mean, so kind of going through that, then you have big problem. Sorry. Google Slides is always a little wonky. Big problem. How are we going to change that problem? Here's our secret. And boom, huge traction. By the way, we're playing in this huge market that's underserved. Sorry, Google Slides again. What the hell's going on? Sorry, guys. Let me go back. So we got huge market, underserved market. That's where we're playing. Then we have kind of personas. Here's all of the pain points our customers are feeling that are not our customers yet. The persona you mentioned, solution, moat, and kind of got the reinforcing of how awesome we are and wrap. Awesome. Let's talk kind of last slide, and we'll get into some Q&A as well. And then again, Michael, thanks for your time. Can we talk about investor lists? You mentioned quite a few times, like finding the right investor, right? The investor that understands that they're not scared of the SMB market that you're in, that they're not scared that the shutdown of the bank, was a big reason for some of the growth. Like how did you go about building your investor list and finding the right investors?
Yeah, so this is definitely on you as the CEO, right? Is to get very familiar with the market, different investors in the fintech space, and the relevant investors. It's all about focus too, and who you let at the top of your funnel will determine kind of the efficiency of your process. And the way that I do it, especially as I start out, is I'm just focused on lead. Finding a lead investor is the most important piece of the process. We were like something ridiculous, like 10x oversubscribed or something like that, because both the lead and our insiders had taken up like 99% of our round. And so we were only able, to allocate that 1% to some of those follow-on investors. Had I invested a lot of my time up front in having conversations with follow-up investors, it would have gone in vain, right? So I would definitely put a big focus on lead investors and, ironing out who are the most relevant for you. How do you do that? Look at Crunchbase, look at any of those kind of like platforms that give you ideas of relevant portfolios, investments over time. I saw that you had somewhere like look, or first place to start would be like existing investors. Yeah, there you go. Building an investor list, start with existing investors.
Yeah.
My feedback there would be actually don't. I would say start with you and just doing a ton of research. Who invested in like all relevant players in your space, right?
Yeah.
Then obviously cross-reference that with who invested in your competitors, removing those from that pipeline. And then once you have a general kind of like 50-ish VCs that you want to get to talk to, then go to your existing investors. Hey, do you guys have any relationships here? Or go to your, founder network that you might have. Hopefully some of them might have gotten investment from those shops. Getting a founder referral stacks up way higher than an investor referral, right? So usually either looking at that VC's portfolio, if you know anyone from those shops, or from the portfolio companies, founder reference is worth its weight in gold for sure. So yeah, I think that was awesome. Like that's where I would start.
How did you find your lead for the restaurant? Was it a founder intro from someone else, reaching out cold? Remember how you found the lead for most recent round?
I had actually talked to Valar a few years back and nothing ever happened. We then got reintroduced by one of our current investors. We got reconnected, and that was it. And then we started up the conversation and they were totally in. And
awesome. Were you keeping, were you updating investors over your potential investors over time, like with progress leading up to the A, or do you kind of treat it as a process separate and you're not, building those relationships or nurturing those potential investors?
I would keep certain, and just to be clear, these are investors that are not currently invested.
Yeah, not investors that are currently invested, right. Correct.
So we do a pretty good job of actually sending out, obviously, visible VC reports to our existing investors. And so you're able to drive a lot of fervor and interest and excitement with your insiders, right? Who are then, kind of megaphones to the outside world. So that's kind of piece number one. Piece number two, keeping those other investors up to date. Like that ties back to what I shared earlier. Like I think there's a balance between sharing information and sharing too much information and not being too desperate. I've heard it work in some cases, but it has never, been too valuable for me personally. And so now as I, continue my fundraising, life, I'm probably going to err on the side of less is more.
Yeah. And how did you manage all of this? Were you using like Google Sheet, Pipedrive? Yeah,
but Google Sheet, just having everything in Google Sheet, the different step of the process, relevant investments that VC might have in their portfolio, the stages that they typically invest, the average check sizes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. Let's get to some Q&A and we'll wrap up here. Question from Dave. How long is a good pitch session? Yeah, like, I'd be curious, like, did you have some that were like 10 minutes and it's over and some are an hour? Like, do you recall the length that you guys were doing when you had an engaged investor?
It's literally all up in the air, right? There's no one answer. Hopefully, right, there's back and forth dialogue, right, and then those can last longer. Like some of the best conversations I've had is like, you know, you have a conversation that's anchored on whatever the deck, et cetera, but you have like other conversations that happen along the way, and little before you've been in the room for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
So like there isn't really a one size fits all of like, hey, if you're in the room for 67 minutes, like you're going to get a term sheet.
Yeah. Yes, we are recording, so we'll send this out to everyone that's registered. How did you agree on proper valuation? Well, that's a good question. Did you put anything in the slide in your deck, like here's how much we're looking to raise and here's how much we're looking to give up? Or were you letting the lead come in and set those terms?
Yeah. So interesting question. That's what a lot of people focus on. This is one of the ways that I'm probably a little bit weird. We never optimize for that. Right? It's not necessarily our job as the founder, especially in an early stage company. Like, sure, you could say, hey, I want to be priced at X valuation, but you're already going to price people out potentially. And like, if they have any concerns about you or the business, and then you kind of throw that in there, it's like, hey, you, the founder, right? You have that preference, et cetera, but it might not be realistic to certain people. So the way that I've always done is like, you know, obviously investors will always try to pry that from you to see if you're even in the same ballpark. The way that I respond is just like, hey, listen, like that's your job, right? To come up with a valuation. Like that's what you guys do professionally. I'm just here trying to swing the hammer and build a really successful business. I'm not trying to optimize for anything, you know, outworldly. I'm just trying to get something that's market, right? And keep on building.
Yeah, I love it. Do you have an Adam wrote in, do you send an executive summary with a teaser deck or just the teaser? I think you mentioned you send a blurb typically with the
blurb
the teaser deck. Yeah, and the blurb, we've done a lot of research on this. 200 to 250 words or less is typically like the shorter the blurb, the better. It's the more someone's gonna open the teaser deck and react.
The one thing I would add to the blurb, like you should have a blurb, however many words. You should also have some like highlighted kind of like metrics or like things that pop off the page, right?
Yep.
You want to have like 3x, blah, 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 or, you know, 100% month over month growth or something like that, that really, you know, pops out at the investor as well.
Yeah. Cues or signals that an investor is not interested. I know one we already talked about, which is they don't ask for the follow-up deck. Any other kind of cues or signals you saw as a common pattern throughout the race?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where you are, right? Like if you don't get a single question during your pitch, like that should be a red flag, right? You definitely want to make sure that they are just as invested as you are in the call, meaning you're pitching them. Hopefully they're picking up what you're putting down and then asking thoughtful questions along the way. If they're not, that's probably a pretty big signal that they're not interested.
Yeah. Two questions, and then we'll wrap here. One is anything you wish you would have done differently?
Yeah, I mean, hindsight's always 20/20.
Yeah.
The only thing that
probably not. You were
mind,
successful, right? Like,
no, definitely. I mean, the only thing I would have done differently, I guess, like, it's difficult to say without having the experience, but just be more sensitive to, you know, revenue, top line revenue growth, unit economics, right? Series A, I think you had that question somewhere before of like, how does the pitch differ now than before? Right? Like over time in the fundraising life cycle from seed to A to B to C, like it just becomes a much tighter focus, right? And metrics start becoming, you know, way more apparent and are brought way more to the forefront. So like ARPU, right? Average revenue per user becomes incredibly important. revenue, unit economics, payback, all of this stuff becomes very, very important. And just the story that you have around those economics is very important.
Yeah. What? So that was a good segue to the final question. Are you thinking about the benchmarks for the Series B in the next round? Or are you kind of just in execution mode right now and not too worried about future rounds?
Interesting question. We're very much focused. Like, fundraising is obviously not a thing. I mean, we raised like close to 3x what we were initially set out to raise. So we don't need to fundraise in the short term. That said, it's interesting kind of seeing the broader market and how interested other investors are given this kind of small sign of success along the way. So will we do anything, in the shorter term? TBD, but we're definitely not focused on it.
Cool. Micheal, thank you so much for your time. I know it's very valuable. This is awesome. Thanks for being a great partner to Visible. And congrats again on the raise and running us through this. If we didn't get to your questions, super sorry. Well, we do a good job of trying to grab these out of Zoom, so we'll probably shoot you a follow-up email if you have a question we didn't get to. But thanks so much, and we'll see everyone soon.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. This is great.
Yeah, awesome. See you, everybody.
Take care. Bye.